Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Round 2 preview podcast. I'm Josh Welge here with Steve Soucie. Souce, how you doing?
Not too bad. Getting ready for round 2 here and just trying to get some things lined up here. So should be an interesting week of 64 games around the state.
No doubt about it. You know, that first round last weekend, really, the powerhouses, kind of took care of business, which, made for some lopsided scores. But as I recall when I watched the NCAA tournament, everybody loves upsets and whatnot. But I always tell friends, the good thing is that when there's not upsets, it really sets up some powerhouse matchups down the road. And I think we're going to start to get some of those this weekend.
Yeah, there aren't a whole bunch of what I would classify as Cinderella stories. Even in the group of lower seeds, there's a reason why maybe they were seeded a little bit lower than they would have had it been like a historic straight seeding type of situation.
No, definitely not the case. I think what we're going to do today, like we did last week, we're going to kind of start at 1A, work our way back up to 8A, kind of take a look at some of the matchups that catch our eye in each class. And we'll start with 1A, and I know you had written about it in your previews breakdown for this week, is that in 1A, typically the conference that really gets a lot of attention, that Northwest Upstate Illini Conference, and they're still looking pretty strong too with Stockton and Lena Winslow moving into the second round. But little conference called the Western Illinois Valley Conference. They're doing some work. I think there's 5 of their programs in the second round, and there's 2 conference rematches, and the one that kind of caught my eye, Hardin, Calhoun, and Greenfield, they played very early in the year as a 1-score game, and now they get a rematch in the second round. But man, that conference is doing some work.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of understated because, I mean, Camp Point Central is in that conference. That's the one that people kind of lean on. But, all year long, this conference puts together, 5-6 teams deep that I feel like when we get into the playoffs, they have an opportunity to maybe win a couple of games. The biggest problem for them is the same thing that happens to the Northwest Upstate Illini teams on normal years, is due to the north-south bracketing, they run into each other usually pretty quick. And that's what happens here. Like you said, we've got 2 matchups between those teams. I'm interested in the other one, too, with Camp Point Central and Brown County. Brown County's got a good team. I mean, that is a team that rolled in the first round over not so long ago, a team that was in the 2A state championship game in Athens. So that's a good team, too, with Camp Point Central obviously being a legitimate threat to get to the state finals. So it's a deep conference. Obviously there's 5 teams still alive from that league, and it looks like obviously they can't get any more than 3 to the next round since there's those head-to-head matchups. But it wouldn't surprise me if 3 of them do.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get rematches in the playoffs between like conference rival types. We saw a fair amount of them in the first round as well. Some of them in the larger classes, and sure enough, they turned out to be pretty close games. The rematches and. I mean, I would not be surprised if either of those games are pretty close matchups in those 1A rematches.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all either.
Moving up to Class 2A, and that's a class that we've talked about. A lot of powerhouses, a lot of undefeated teams. I believe all 7 undefeated teams won in the first round, right, Seuss?
Yep.
Which sets the stage for some big matchups. Not only this week, but looking forward. But the one matchup that stuck out to me involves the undefeated team that they really struggled in the first round. Farmington, they barely survived Eastland Pearl City, and now they got Aurora Christian coming to their place. Aurora Christian is not one of those undefeated programs, but they play in a league, the Chicago Christian, with a lot of kind of larger schools in there, like Bishop McNamara and Wheaton Academy, schools like that, Hope Academy. They have a really good quarterback, Asa Johnson. That's a tough second round game for Farmington with Aurora Christian coming there.
That is a team that, even though they have 2 losses on the season, you go back and you look at those scores, they still almost put up 40 points. I think they put up 40 plus points in one of those losses and darn near 40 in the other. So, and those losses are to pretty good programs. I mean, Bishop McNamara accounted for one of those losses, Hope Academy for the other. So you're looking at a pretty good Aurora Christian team. When I presupposed that this game was going to happen, I figured that you were probably going to have a high-scoring shootout in this one. Then Farmington gives me a little pause by only scoring 10 last week. Granted, that's a pretty good 14 seed that they played. We were just talking about the NUIC in the 1A draw. That is an NUIC team that's up in the 2A draw. Their losses are to very good teams. Stockton, Lena Winslow, Dupec. I mean, that's the kind of losses that they accumulated. That's why they were a 14. And Farmington needed to pull that out in the late going with a field goal in that game. So I think that has the potential to be one of those games that you're looking at after the fact. It might be a 55 to 52 game. I mean, I think that's just something we might see.
Wow. Ooh, okay. Is there any other 2A games that stand out to you before we move on to 3A?
Well, the one that I kind of like a lot is the battle between Seneca and Wilmington. I've told some people this week, if you're going to the Seneca-Wilmington game, get there when it starts because it's not going to be a very long football game. Both of these teams want to run the football, and that's really all they have an interest in doing. So I would be astonished if that game lasted much more than an hour and a half, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, if you run the ball as well as those two teams do, why would you have interest in doing anything different? I mean, it's funny. I go to games sometimes. I've talked to you about this before, where a team runs the ball, and then they decide to pass, and it doesn't go well. And I'm like, why'd you do that? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, just keep doing it. And both of those teams do it really well. So yeah, that's another one that I got my eye on. We turn to Class 3A. A matchup that I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of our Friday night drive staff, there was a point where we're like, I think I might want to go to this game Friday night. And we were all talking about the same game. And the game that was that Bishop McNamara at IC Catholic Prep game on Friday night in Elmhurst. One of the few Friday night games, to be honest with you. And it is a matchup that has a lot of sizzle and a lot of attention. Former conference rivals in the Metro Suburban. They played a number of times in the regular season and in the playoffs. IC Catholic, I looked, they've actually won the last 7 meetings. The last time Bishop McNamara beat them was 2015. That was the last state championship that Bishop McNamara won under Rich Zanani. IC Catholic's kind of controlled that matchup since. However, Soucie, you know it. Bishop McNamara, they're back this year, with a lot of speed in that lineup. And on the other side, IC Catholic, they can really fill it up with their quarterback, Grant Lang, throwing to Nate Lang, throwing to Grant Bowen and Will Schmidt. This game, like a game you mentioned previously, this game could really score a lot. There's going to be a lot of points in this game, I think.
Yeah, you referenced that 2015 game. I was at that 2015 game, and that was one of the more notable games that I can remember that was affected by snow. Absolute blizzard conditions in that game. So that was a fascinating one. This is an interesting rivalry. It's two programs that have a lot of history in the last 2 decades or so of being elite. McNamara kind of took a step back over the last couple of years, but has really kind of roared back into this one. This is it's fundamentally at its core, this is a pretty young IC Catholic team. I think they have the ability to possibly run the table and win the state championship this year. If that doesn't happen, they go at the top of the list for me in terms of what teams you're looking towards in the 2026 season, because this team is loaded in that underclassmen group.
Yeah, this matchup, there's 2 questions that I get out of this. Is number one, okay, Bishop McNamara's back. Well, how far back are they? I mean, if they go into IC Catholic and they win, well, oh my God. On the other hand, IC Catholic, you mentioned their youth. I mean, is this youth capable of making a deep run? Because, man, it does not get any easier because, they got this matchup. If they were somehow to get by this, they got, potentially Byron looming, Richmond Burton. I mean, the top half of that 3A bracket is loaded.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, this is kind of a strange bracket in the sense that, even though McNamara and IC Catholic have played each other a lot in the past, they didn't play this year. Yeah. But 4 other matchups in 3A this week are rematches of regular season games. So you have at least a book of knowledge a little bit on what you can expect from some of these teams. Because, you look at that bottom bracket, the South bracket, 3 of those 4 games are games that were contested in the regular season. So, and a couple of them were not very close. So you're kind of thinking maybe that repeats themselves, especially with top-seeded Williamsville. But all these games, at least in some vein, I think most of them, I should say, I think they have the potential to potentially be pretty interesting. So that makes for a good round 2.
Kind of like that Byron Dupac game. That's another one. I mean, Dupac, they gave Byron one of their better games of the year, even though that was it turned out to be a few touchdown spread. I mean, Dupac led him at halftime, I believe.
Yeah, they did, and like I said, that is definitely one of those games that you're just kind of keeping an eye on because you never really like to play a team twice if you don't have to. A lot of these teams are probably sitting there going, I really don't want to deal with this again. I know we handled it the last time. I don't want my kids getting overconfident that it's just going to be an easy repeat because that's where you get into a little bit of trouble.
Turning to Class 4A and, mentioned repeat or rematches. We got a rematch of a quarterfinal from last year, Dixon and Coal City. And, oh, man, this is a good one. Coal City, I know last week in the Southwest podcast, they were talking about that. They're like, I think Coal City and Sterling could be a pretty good first-round game. And Coal City was like, no, I don't think so. And they blew the doors off of Sterling. But, Dixon could be a different story altogether because, Dixon outside of that Byron game, they've been rolling all year.
You look at all 64 games that are on the board right now, and if you ask me to throw up 2 or 3 games that I thought were going to be the closest, just based on what I know about these two teams, this game would definitely be on that list. I really feel like I look at it, both teams kind of center around the same things. They're kind of they bank on their defense to get them extra possessions. Dixon's been a little bit more run heavy than Coal City has been. It's understandable. They have a 2,000-yard rusher on their roster. Coal City can run it and can run it effectively. Their running back last week had 270-plus yards and 5 touchdowns. But they can throw it, which is a little bit different than Coal City teams in the past. But you look at this thing on paper, I think we're going to have the same thing we had last year, which was ultimately decided by a touchdown.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Any other matchups in 4A that kind of stick out to you?
You just kind of look down at that South bracket. There are some intriguing things that are going to get solved. Carterville, an undefeated team during the regular season, got some questions about their schedule. Well, they're playing an opponent this week where I have no such questions about their schedule. So we're going to see exactly what Carterville is and what they're made of in this game in terms of whether or not they can keep going or whether or not, one of those teams that has kind of been a 4A powerhouse, Sacred Heart Griffin, whether or not they create another one of, it's not the Leonard Bowl anymore, but potentially could have Rochester Sacred Heart Griffin in a quarterfinal game.
Turning to Class 5A, and there are some, matchups between some public schools that maybe on seed or whatever, they might be favored, but they got some tough ones this week. There is that Providence against Kankakee game. There is that Cary Grove tricky game at St. Patrick. And there's the one that I want to talk about is that Prairie Ridge at St. Francis game. It's a rematch from last year. Prairie Ridge going to St. Francis. St. Francis beat them last year. That being said, Prairie Ridge's quarterback returned from an injury in that game. He's obviously been healthy, I believe, for most of the year. That's a good one. I think that's going to be a game that I feel like kind of shapes the bracket the rest of the way.
Yeah, that is a really interesting one, and I kind of saw that coming even about a week before the draw came out. I was like, well, whoever ends up getting that one out of that coin flip, that I had that 8-9 game for I think 3 weeks. That was the way that my draw was breaking out. It was Morgan Park and St. Francis in that first one. That turned out to be a really good game, and I expected it to be. But Wheaton St. Francis, it comes into that game, fighting their way through it. They are just so battle tested. That schedule is ridiculously difficult. Nothing Prairie Ridge is going to bring at them is going to intimidate them in that situation. I think Prairie Ridge is a very good football team. So, this is a second round 1 versus 9, but I feel like it's a lot closer than that in terms of trying to figure out who's going to win the football game.
You mentioned battle test with St. Francis, and I feel like, they play in that Chicago Catholic League, and it's like they play such a schedule that when they have a few tough games or some losses, it's like you find warts in teams, and you're like, well, maybe they just play a really darn good schedule, and it's not easy week in and week out, because they have playmakers all over the place that are tough to stop. I know all 3 of the receivers all scored touchdowns in last year's game against Prairie Ridge. They're all back this year. for me is can Prairie Ridge, what can they do with those big play receivers? And on St. Francis side, can the defense hold up against that Prairie Ridge, that option attack that they run with a very talented quarterback? Definitely one of the better first round games of the weekend.
Well, I think the interesting thing for me when I look at this 5A bracket, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but I can see it in my mind's eye where maybe all of the lower seeds win on the north side of the bracket. I can see that. I'm not saying I think it's going to happen. And then I go down to that south bracket. I think some of those other lower seeds have a shot here. And I'm not shocked that I'm saying that, because I really genuinely feel that 5A is probably the most wide open of all the classes. But, you look at these underseeds down here on the south side of the bracket. You got fifth-seeded Providence. Granted, it's a 4-5 game, but by seed, they're the underdog in that one. I think Providence is in good – it might be in good position to win that game. I kind of like Bloomington as a 7 seed over Oak Forest. So, there are some teams right there that I think, like I said, underseeds in this bracket, I think, have as good a shot as any of the brackets to maybe advance in this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we moved to Class 6A, where I don't know if I feel the same way about that, to be perfectly honest with you. We're all looking at the potential of the Nazareth East St. Louis game. I don't want to say they're both going to be challenged this week, but they're both playing pretty good teams. With Glenwood and East St. Louis, and then Nazareth's going to Wheaton Warrenville South. Wheaton Warrenville South they've played such a tough schedule. In their conference of the Duquesne, they stepped out of conference and they played Lions in 8A school, and they really gave them a good game. They had that one, Wheaton South had that one game against St. Charles North where they just blew the doors off. That really gives me pause of how good can this team be? And I guess we're going to find out this week, because Nazareth is playing as good as anybody right now. Yeah,
I think that's definitely a situation where you kind of look at that one, and that could potentially be a pretty interesting game. You mentioned the East St. Louis Glenwood game as well. I went down and saw Glenwood last week. I think they're a very solid football team. But that being said, I think they're dealing with a whole different animal this week with East St. Louis. They're going to have to show a lot more ability to move the football down the field if they're going to have a prayer of hanging with East St. Louis and the athletes and the speed that team has, because they had to slug their way through that game with Joliet Catholic last week, and they had a lot of trouble kind of consistently putting points on the board. So they had to work at it, and I don't think they're going to have the luxury of scoring only as few points as they did and hoping to be in that game this week against East St. Louis.
Yeah, it just feels like 6A bracket as much as any. There's that matchup that we're waiting for at the very end. So would have been the case in 8A, but things got a little crazy there at the end of the season. So
yep.
A little bit different story there. Students, we're going to take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll take a look at the last two brackets.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
Back on the Friday Night Drive second round preview podcast. We turned to 7A and Soucie. The bottom half of that 7A bracket is just plain nasty with some really good teams there. There's a couple of great second round matchups to dive in, and then potential great matchups, on down the road. The game that I'll start with, West Suburban Silver rivals, Downers Grove North going to Glenbard West. It was a matchup that Glenbard West, they won the first game. It was a final score of 35-21 in week 4, but it honestly was probably more of a blowout than even that. They really controlled the game, but there's a giant asterisk there, I'll just say. Owen Lanzu did not play in that game, the Downers Grove North quarterback. He's now back. He's played in 4 games since. There's a question of, how much of a difference does one player make? He plays one of the most important positions on the field. They've been really good since he's returned. They had the one loss to Lions. It came down to the very end. And now they got to go to Glenbard West on Saturday. And I will say, too, I'm just going to throw it out there. The weather don't look too great for Saturday. And Duchamp Field, when the weather's not so good, makes for an interesting situation there.
I've lost a pair of shoes or two in the muck at Duchamp Field in my time. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So, basically, you're right. You kind of got to throw that first result out, but you still have to kind of take it into account too, because it's one of those situations where they still, Glenbard West was still very effective offensively in that game against the defense that Downers Grove North's throwing out there. Does Downers Grove North likely have a formula for more points in this one? Yes, but can they keep Glenbard West in check? And I don't know if they can. So it's definitely one of those things where you kind of got to take a little bit out of that column, but you can't take it all out of that column either.
No, you can't. I mean, that's a question I have too. I mean, I think Downers Grove North, I mean, they're just a different offense when he was in there. They really kind of went into the shell and became a very run-oriented type team, and they're just not that. When he's out there, they're a dynamic offense that can run the ball and pass the ball. That being said, what can they do with that Glenbard West offense? It's just so explosive. It's got so much speed, throughout the lineup. And again, I just kind of bring it up. I'm just going to bring it up that if there is weather in the forecast, it just changes things because it's probably going to be a little bit more of a running oriented type game. We'll see. It should be a great one. I'm going to be there on Saturday. Looking forward to it. What other 7A games are you looking at, Soucie?
You could really pull these games out of a hat, to be completely honest with me, and I would tell you that I like that game. I mean, there are several really interesting ones. The one that kind of jumps off the page at me right now is that St. Charles North Carmel game. It's just, I look at Carmel, I look at what they've done over the second half of the season, and I know why they're a 14 seed, but it still doesn't seem right to me. It's like they've been so good in the second half, and I mean, you got to look back at some of their losses. They lost to a Providence team that was playing probably its best football at that point in time. They lost to Montini in that really wild game. But all along, Trey Taylor is continually putting up these monster numbers. And I just don't – I really don't know how teams are going to be able to rein him in. And, and St. Charles North is a team that has shown on multiple occasions that they can put a bunch of points up. I just feel like this might be a video game. I just feel like we're just going to have big plays all over the place, and it's going to be whoever can survive it at the end of it when the dust clears.
Well, I was talking to Joel Bennett about this on our podcast on Tuesday, is that when St. Charles North is involved in really big games, they usually become video game type games, and they're usually like all the way down that come to the end. So they usually do not disappoint. That will be one of the kind of rather large amount of Saturday night games that we have this week. But man, I tell you, Carmel in that 7A bracket, the two teams that I feel are as dangerous as any, Carmel and Batavia, the way both of them are playing right now. They are both playing well.
I'll throw another game at you too that I'm really interested in. I'm interested in that Saturday afternoon game between Lincoln Way West and Kenwood. You got to go all the way back to week 1. Both you and I saw this Kenwood team. I'm looking forward to seeing Keontae Lewis again. He's been putting up a huge season outside of that week 1 loss to Wheaton St. Francis that they lost in the final minute. I mean, that was a game that they could have won. That's their only loss of the year. I mean, and they're playing against a really solid Lincoln Way West team. think I'm going to be able to get over there on Saturday afternoon to take a look at that game, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Turn to Class 8A, and I'm just going to say I need to stop doubting Lions Township. I've picked against them the last 3 weeks. They proved me wrong the last 3 weeks. They beat Downsville North. They beat York back-to-back games. Just a really good football team. They're playing really well. They're one of those teams that they took a couple losses early in the year, and you kind of like make a judgment on them a little bit that maybe they're okay, but maybe not what they were the last few years. And they've proven me wrong. They got a great running back, EJ Coleman. They got a good defense. They got some good receivers, and they have another huge challenge this week. They go up to Fremd to play Johnny O'Brien, Northwestern recruit quarterback. I've been wanting to see this kid play for 3 years, and I'm finally going to get a chance to see him play Friday night.
Yeah, when I look at this bracket, I get kind of aggravated. And not to say anything bad about the teams on the south side of the bracket. That's not my intent when I say this. But that north side of the bracket does not look the way that I hoped it would look. Like in terms of where the teams are placed on the bracket. You've got Mount Carmel at the top of it. They had to dogfight their way through that rematch with Loyola just to get to the second round. But, everybody was talking about it all season long, and Lincoln Way East took those 2 losses at the end of the regular season. So they're both on the same side of the bracket. If they win this week, that's setting up a quarterfinal game between those 2 programs. I don't think anybody wanted that game that soon. And then you look at kind of that bottom, that group right underneath it in the north bracket. Like you mentioned, that Fremd Lions game is really interesting. I think they're both very good football teams. I really like that Warren team with Aaron Stewart. And honestly, I'm not sure if anybody's been playing better in the second half of the season right now than Bolingbrook is. And they've got that Warren Bolingbrook. So it feels like most of the teams that I was really intrigued to see how they were going to do in this 8A minefield, a lot of them are on this north side of the bracket. And several of them are probably going to be gone from the north side of the bracket that I'm very interested in seeing. So not to throw shade on anybody in the south bracket. They've earned their spots there. Some of those north bracket teams and the fact that they're pairing off against one another this week kind of makes me a little sad that a few of these teams are going to be gone by quarterfinal round.
No, I agree. And people that look at it, they're like, well, that's not fair the way it is. Well, I'm sorry. It's math. It's records, yep. And then it's playoff points. And you know it as well as I do that really know the system. But that being said, it does make you kind of, sad to see some of these teams that are going to, go by the wayside a little bit earlier than we like. That Warren Bolingbrook game, 2 best running backs in the state, maybe.
It could be.
Yeah. Lewis, you like running backs, you want to be in Gurney on Saturday night.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. TJ Lewis, I knew about TJ Lewis, but the numbers that he's been putting up against the competition that he's been putting up has been really, really impressive. And they have a nice little combo action going on there. Quarterback gets involved in that ground game a little bit too, kind of doesn't allow you to completely key on him. They're doing some nice things in Bolingbrook.
No doubt. TJ Lewis, he's the best running back I've seen in the last 5 years. I say that with a huge caveat. I did not get to see De'Aaron Hill play live last year, and he's pretty special. So yeah, there should be a fun one. Soucie, before we get out of here, any big picture thoughts for the second round?
I just think that there are just a lot of interesting games that are kind of coming at us faster, especially in some of the smaller classes. Like if you look at the overall record of the 16 teams remaining in Class 2A, it's hilarious. You're basically sitting on the situation that the 16 teams in that draw are averaging less than 1 loss as a whole. That's kind of crazy. So you've got a lot of games that are just kind of coming to fruition here in the second round, where I think we're going to get that token phrase that you hear a lot. That should have been a semifinal game. I think we're going to hear that phrase a lot this weekend.
No doubt about that. A lot of good stuff coming up this weekend. A lot of good stuff for Friday Night Drive. Got a lot of podcasts already out. Soucie, you've been really, you've been burning a podcast trail this week. You got your Kankakee area one with Mason Schweizer. Of course, I recorded one with Joel Bennett yesterday for the Western Suburbs, South and West with JT, Sam, and Eddie. I probably missing one, but maybe not. But a lot of good stuff for this weekend. I think we're going to get out of here. But everybody, follow Friday Night Drive this weekend. Everybody have a great week and a great second round of the playoffs.